Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of True Scary Stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be talking about crazy exes. So, I want to put a trigger warning at the beginning of this video because some of these stories may contain sensitive topics. Viewer discretion is advised. Also, I want to give a very good friend of mine, the Grim Reaper's Nightmare, an opportunity to read a story in this video. He has a smaller narration channel, but I really enjoy his work and I enjoy his narrations. So, he will be the very first story in this video. After that, it'll go back to me reading. If you enjoy his work, make sure that you go to his channel. It's linked in the description down below, and give him a subscription. It would definitely mean a lot to both me and him. Now, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories.
A couple of years ago, I was at home alone. At the time, I was still living with my family, but they had gone on vacation and thus, I had the house to myself. Well, I had been working a lot of hours that week and it was my day off. So, naturally, I called the boys for some cold ones. Cold ones were drank, and at about 11 p.m., everyone decided to go home. Drunk and tired, I locked my doors, went upstairs to my room and knocked out cold. Until I awoke from the ding-dong of my doorbell. It was about 4 a.m., if I can recall correctly. Needless to say, I was still kinda drunk. For a few seconds I asked myself what the fuck. Not sure if I actually heard my doorbell or if it was just my imagination, so I waited, and then I heard it again. I got up, groggy, and went to my hallway and yelled, "I'll be right there." I headed down the stairs. As I made my way down, I panicked. What if one of my friends got in a crash or never made it home? They weren't drunk like I was when they left, but still, you never know. Or maybe I thought it was one of them returning for something. As I got to the door, I stupidly, something I'd never do sober due to it being so late, opened the door. It was my ex. Just for some quick background, me and my ex didn't end on good terms. We dated for years. She cheated. I was heartbroken. We went back and forth, and it took me about 1.5 years to get over her. Mainly by blocking her on my phone and all social media, and even my email. Yes. She even contacted me there. To put it kindly, she filled the crazy ex stereotype. Plus, it had been maybe 3 months since I finally cut her off, so needless to say, I was confused. When I opened the door, I just said, "Hi," in a shy manner. Confused, I asked, "What are you doing here, Jenny?" Fake name. She just said, "I wanted to see you and talk a bit." So, then I said, "You know what time it is?" She then said, "I know it's late, but I'm on my way to school, college, and wanted to stop by since it's on the way. And I knew you'd be home alone." Now, this definitely weirded me out because how the fuck did she know that? My family isn't in contact with her, and as far as I know, they had blocked her on all of their social media. So I asked her, "How do you know that?" And she said, "Oh, I just know." We kind of paused and she asked to come in to talk. Stupidly, I said okay. After coming in, she pet my dogs and we went into my living room and sat down. We talked about how we were both doing and then what I expected. She basically begged me to take her back. I said no. She began to cry and so did I. Well, one thing led to another and you can imagine what occurred. Guilty and regretful. As soon as we finished, I made an excuse that I had to work the next day. She pleaded for me to let her stay and I kept saying no, to which she began to scream at me for using her. I replied some mean things and then kicked her out. So that was that, right? Wrong. After about 20 minutes, I had returned to my room until I heard pounding on my door. Instantly, I knew who it was and went down to open the door. It was my ex. She came inside without even asking. She looked flustered, like she had just went for a jog or something, and definitely still looked angry. But there was one thing, my gut feeling, and it was telling me something was off. When she came in, I had noticed that one of my dogs, I have two, began to make a low growl at her. This never happened because they've known her for years and liked her. I noticed it, but kept my cool. I asked her, "What do you want?" I said, "You have to leave." She just looked at me with those piercing eyes and said in a shaking voice, "Why do you always do this? Why can't you just, She got closer to me. At the same time, keep in mind that she was wearing a zip-up hoodie with 2 pockets on each side. She had her right hand free, but her other hand was in her pocket. I wasn't 100% sure, but I could tell she was gripping something. My mind raced and I thought, fuck, I'm about to get stabbed to death by my ex and not be found until my family comes back. Almost on cue after thinking this, my second dog, let's call her Ash, began to bark like crazy at her. Ash is a weird dog. She is lazy and very rarely barks, especially at people, so this on top of my ex giving me this weird feeling actually made me a little scared. To which I then told Jenny, "Look, I'm sorry. What happened was a mistake, but I have to work and you have to leave." This lit the fuse. She went ballistic, and I'm talking spit in my face and strained red eyes yelling. To be honest, I can't remember what she had yelled about, but it probably wasn't good. The entire time of her rant, she never took her hand out of her pocket, and when she finally calmed down, she just stood there, inches from my face, breathing heavy. Dog still barking at her the entire time. The look on her face is the one that you can tell when someone wants to do or say something. but they're just holding back from doing what they really want to do by like a thread of mental power. Personally, I didn't want to find out what was in her pocket or what she wanted to do. So, annoyed and very much worried after this verbal onslaught, I just told her simply to get the fuck out or I'm going to call the cops. Angrily, she paused and just said, "You'll regret this," and left. So I locked my door, went straight to my room, and looked out my window for the next couple of hours. She didn't come back. Since that day, I haven't seen or talked to my ex. Not sure if I was being paranoid or if I was just really about to regret letting her in. So, to my ex, let's not meet ever.
A few years ago, while I was still in university, I was in a serious relationship with this guy who I thought was perfect for me. My parents liked him, he got along with all my friends, and frankly, I thought I was the luckiest girl alive. He was on his exchange semester in my city, and about 5 to 6 months into the relationship, he suggested transferring to my city. I thought that would be great, and helped him out with his application. A few months passed by. He extends his exchange semester, and we were closer than ever, even living together at this point. One day, I was at work, summer internship. He got accepted into my university and forwarded the email to me. I was overjoyed, and my friends were extremely thrilled as well. It felt like a fairy tale come true. We then started looking for apartments and making other arrangements for his move. A few weeks before classes were supposed to start, he flew back to his home country to visit his parents. I did the same, and we planned to come back in 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I fly back out for university, but he didn't. He tells me his dad is really sick, and he has to stay home to take care of him for a few weeks. I didn't think much of it, but then a few weeks later, he tells me that the university emailed him and told him to join in next semester as he already missed out on a few weeks of classes. I thought that was super weird, but then he forwarded all the emails that the university sent him, so I had no reason to believe he was lying. Even though he wasn't attending classes in my country, he would come visit me every month, which was great. A few months pass. The next semester rolls in. He doesn't show up for the first week of class, and when I ask him about it, he says he's really sick and will fly in the following week. He sends me his flight tickets, apartment lease contract, and student visa documents. So again, I have no reason to doubt him. The following week rolls in and he sends me snaps of him boarding the flight. At this point, I'm super excited to see him, and I go wait for him outside of his apartment once the flight lands. It's been an hour since the flight landed, and I don't see him pull up outside the apartment. I ask him where he is, and he says the airport isn't letting him leave because his visa had expired, and that he has to fly back to his home country. My roommate goes down to the university office to figure out why his visa was expired, and they say they have no records of him as a student at my university. My ex then gets really mad over the call and says that the university lost his record, even though they told him to delay his semester. He tells me to hang tight and that his dad will fly in soon to sort it out with the university. At this point, I'm super confused, so I go to the office in his apartment to check if he had paid his deposit. Surprisingly, he did, and it was around $6,000. So I thought that there was no way that he would blow that amount of money for no reason. So I believe his story, and just wait for his dad to sort things out with the university. A few days pass, and I'm just waiting in my room and looking for his acceptance letter, when I notice his student number looks oddly familiar. I open up my acceptance letter and realize I have the exact same student number. That's when I realized he had forged all my documents and had manipulated my friends and I into believing he was a student at my university. I confronted him, and he said that he did all this for me, and that he would find a way to be with me. Till this day, I can never trust anything a guy says to me. So, my ex-boyfriend, if you're reading this, please don't try to come see me again. This is my first time ever posting on Reddit, and I'm not a writer, and I'm writing this on mobile. This is something that happened to me a long time ago, and I am now a much older and wiser woman. I was 20, and I moved from northwestern England to live and work in London. I had no real experience of relationships. On the outside, I appeared extroverted and quite tough, but on the inside, I had no self-confidence. I looked in the mirror and all I could see was a fat, ugly, aggressive, and unlikable person. I now see that none of that was true, but it meant that I was vulnerable. I met a man, Robert. He was 27 years old. We dated, and 6 months later I moved into his flat. There were loads of red flags which I stupidly ignored until I was living in a nightmare. It started with control and emotional abuse. Now, I grew up in a very rough city in northwestern England, and I could handle myself and had a quick temper. So at the beginning, I gave as good as I got, but it escalated to him cheating on me, physically assaulting me, locking me in the flat, isolating me, mind games, and taking my money. There were too many incidents to write about here, but suffice to say, in that 12-month relationship, he terrorized me until I hardly recognized myself. I was desperate to escape, but deep down, I always knew that when I left him, I would be in danger, so I just kept putting it off. One day, he started another fight, but this time, he told me to get out. I didn't need to be told twice. I packed my stuff and was gone within 10 minutes. I had no close friends because he would be so vile that nobody stayed around for very long. I rang a girl that I used to work with and begged her to let me stay with her for the night. She gave me her address and she let me stay with her for a month in her flat, which was about a mile away from his flat in northwest London. This meant I had to use the same tube station to get to work. It started one morning when he was waiting at the tube station. I heard the words, "You effing slag," in my ear, and I ran through the morning rush hour crowd to the train with my heart pounding. He escalated it from that point onwards. He would be at the tube station waiting for me a couple times a week. He would stand behind me as I got my ticket and would verbally abuse me. He would never shout or draw attention to himself, but he would call me names and threaten me in a low tone of voice that made my stomach heave. I never reacted because I knew that's what he wanted. I foolishly hoped that he would get fed up and just leave me alone. Then, he started to show up in the neighborhood around my workplace in West London. I told my manager and colleagues, but this was before mobile phones were commonly used. Other than keeping an eye out for him, they couldn't really do much to help me. Sometimes I would see him at a distance standing in a corner, or catch a glimpse of him in a local market, and then he would vanish. I thought I was going mad or developing paranoia. I moved out of my friend's flat into a shared house about 1.5 miles away from him. I don't know any other areas of London, and I had made some friends in that area, so I didn't want to leave completely. I used the same tube station, and as I stopped seeing him there, I thought he was starting to move on. It took me a couple of weeks to notice the white van with blacked out windows that was permanently parked across the road from my flat. I thought it belonged to a neighbor. I was horrified when I realized it was him, and he would sit in that van day and night, watching me and tracking my movements. One day, soon after the van appeared, he approached one of my housemates to give me a message and asked for the telephone number. I wasn't that friendly with my housemates, so I hadn't told them what was going on. They thought that he was a friend and gave him the number. From then on, he rang every night all through the night. Eventually, I told my housemates what was happening, and they promised not to let him and unplugged the phone that night. He started to leave gifts and cards on my doorstep. My room was on the ground floor, and a brick was thrown through my window. I'm phobic about birds and keep finding dead birds on my windowsill. I was a nervous wreck, flinching at shadows and jumping at the slightest sound. I thought about moving again, but I knew he would find me through my workplace. I went to the police, who said because he hadn't actually done anything, then there was nothing they could do. This was before stalking was a criminal offense in the UK. I would come home and find typed letters posted through the door, asking me why had I been to a certain shop or cafe or theater on a certain day or night. The letters would ask me why I had visited a certain address and who lived there. It was relentless, and I knew that he was letting me know that he was there watching all the time. I wanted to leave London and go back home, but I couldn't tell my family what was happening, as my mother was seriously ill, and I didn't want to worry my dad and my siblings, as they had enough to deal with. In desperation, I decided to pretend that I left London by packing a couple of suitcases and taking them back to my home city. I knew he would be watching me, and I hoped that he would be fooled. I totally underestimated his lunacy. I would stay at my best mate's house when I returned home. I thought I saw him once, but I thought I was just being paranoid. The night after I arrived, I went out for a couple of drinks with my best friend Diane and two other friends, Billy and John. We went to a couple of bars, listened to some music, then all ended up back at her house just drinking and chatting. Billy and John left around 3 a.m. A couple of days later, I returned to London. There was a note waiting for me on the doormat. I opened it, and to my horror, it contained details of my night out, along with threats about what would happen to me for being a cheating, slag, bitch whore. It mentioned John. It named bars where we had drank, and even the name of the band. Then he rang the house phone, screaming and ranting words that made no sense. I saw one of his friends who told me that, unbeknownst to me, the crazy ex had drove 200 miles and gone straight to my best friend's house. He had watched me go out and waited for me to return home from the night out. Then he followed John and waited outside his house too. The following day, when John went to his local pub for a Sunday afternoon drink, my maniac ex followed John in there and made a point of chatting with him to find out his name, etc. This had gone on for about 4 months at this point. About a month later, I was on my way home from work. It was winter, around 7 p.m. and the streets were dark. He grabbed me on a side street, dragged me into the back of the van. I was petrified and crying in the dark, being thrown from side to side. All I could hear was the radio. He hadn't said a word. After about an hour, the van stopped and the back door opened, and I was in an empty car park with trees around it. He kept his hand on the back of my neck as he made me walk for about 20 minutes through what I guessed was a forest. He never said a word as I asked him where we were going, and why he was doing this. It was as though he was deaf because he didn't even acknowledge what I was saying. The night was freezing and there were no lights other than his torch. I don't know how many times I fell over and got dragged back up to my feet. Eventually, we reached a sort of clearing, and he pulled me behind a tree with a stick and plastic bag tied to it. Then he showed me a shallow rectangular hole in the ground and said that that was my grave, and that he would happily go to prison knowing that I was dead because of all the pain that I had caused him. He pulled a short, thin blue rope from his pocket, and at that point he looked unrecognizable. His expression was pure darkness, and all I could see was his crazy eyes staring right through me. He had his hand on my throat and the rope in his other hand. I swear I have never been so scared in my life. I was shaking with terror, and I knew if he put that rope near me, I would piss myself. I honestly thought that forest clearing would be the last place I would ever see again in this world. Suddenly, I knew with complete certainty that I had to stay calm if I was going to get out of this alive. I told him he didn't need to do this, that I knew I was wrong to make him mad. It was all my fault and I was sorry. I told him we could get back together, and I knew now that he really loved me. In the end, God knows how, but somehow I got through to him, and his eyes cleared and he spoke to me. He agreed to let me go and get my things to move back in with him. He drove me back to my flat and I ran inside and collapsed on the floor while he waited outside. he started beeping his horn, banging on the door, and ranting and raving outside the house. My housemate rang the police, but he left as they arrived in the street. I gave him his details and told them what had happened. He denied everything, and the police said that there was no witnesses, so it was my word against his. The police told me they had warned him, but ultimately they couldn't do anything without proof. I gave them the notes he had left, the van registration, the names of people who could verify what I was saying, but still, they said it wasn't enough to arrest him and charge him. They checked the van registration, but it wasn't registered to his name. And so, the stalking and harassment continued. I started carrying a R alarm, hairspray, a screwdriver, and anything else that I thought might protect me. I hadn't slept properly for weeks, and food stuck in my throat if I tried to eat. I was a shadow of my normal self. Friends of his came to see me, to tell me to leave London, as he was obsessed with revenge because I had been to the police. I went to a solicitor who wrote a cease and desist letter. I found parts of it ripped on my doorstep. About 6 months from the start of his terror campaign, I was asked out on a date by Gary, who was a friend of my friend's boyfriend Pete. I was trying to convince myself that I could carry on living with some semblance of normality. I agreed to go out with Gary if Pete came along too. After a few drinks, we went to the club. Pete, who wasn't drinking, said he would give us a lift home. We were in Pete's car, and he started the engine and drove for about 5 minutes. Then I heard Pete say, "There's something wrong with my brakes." Then he said, "There's a white van following us." My heart started beating 100 miles per hour, and my throat started to close as I asked him, "Does the van have the reg number 1234? To my horror, it did. It was him following us. I quickly had to explain to Pete and Gary that I had a lunatic ex-boyfriend who just happened to be stalking me right at that very moment. Pete was only driving at about 20 miles per hour. He pulled the car over, and we jumped out and ran through a housing estate of tenant flats until we lost him. We found a mini cab office, and as I was too scared to go back to my flat, I ended up sleeping on Gary's couch. Unsurprisingly, the potential new relationship ended that night. The next day, Gary rang me to say that he had been back to pick up his car, and the brake cable had been partially cut until it was nearly severed. I truly believe he tried to kill all 3 of us that night. Gary and Pete wanted me to go to the police, but I had lost all faith in them. Every time I had asked the police to help me, they had done nothing, and it just made things worse by reinforcing how powerless I was. Enough was enough. I knew that he wasn't going to stop. I didn't even know what he wanted anymore. That same week, I gave notice on my flat and handed in my notice at work. I booked a 6-month air ticket to India. In my crazy mind, I thought, well, it's one of the most populated places on the planet, so he will never find me there. I traveled around India on my own for 6 months. I did a lot of thinking and healing and returned to my home city. I never returned to London, and thank God, I never saw him again. So for starters, I've been dating this girl for a while now, her name being Isabel, going on a year very soon, and all is going well in that regard. However, when we first met, she told me about a less than ideal ex-boyfriend she had a couple of years before she had met me. They still went to the same school, and he ended up going to the same university as us after we graduated high school as well. Apart from that, all 3 of us went to the same church, meaning there was a lot of opportunity for him to meet us. The creepy encounters with him, Jose being his name, started a little before we graduated high school. After he heard that we were dating, he was furious, even going as far as to say I was abusive on Twitter. But nobody believed him, given his accusation was complete horseshit, and he was notorious for doing the same in the past in order to keep Isabel from talking to other guys when they were together. That was just the beginning, though. It started off small at first, seeing him in the mall whenever we would go out on dates, before it was illegal to go outside, After a while, it seemed like a little too much to seem like a coincidence, though. He started showing up at our church, which, although wouldn't ever really be abnormal, he all of a sudden joined the same youth ministry as well. It seemed as if he was trying to get as close to us as possible at all times. There was one instance I remember very specifically. At a graduation party everybody was invited to. Everyone was in the backyard, and I remember looking across the patio and just seeing him staring at me and Isabel from the other side. His eyes didn't move, and his breathing was very heavy, as if he was angry, anxious, or both. He didn't try anything that night, though, probably because of the other people there that night. After I left the party and dropped off my girlfriend at her house for the night, I saw a black car following me for a majority of the way home, which I really didn't think much of. And not to sound like that guy or anything, but I wasn't too worried about it either. I'm fairly well built, and have done martial arts for a little over 6 years. The next day, that same car was tailing me almost the whole day while I was running errands. Things got a little heated in the afternoon, though. I was sitting in my car outside of a store, waiting for a curbside pickup, when he parked a few spaces down from me, got out of his car, and came up to my window. He started yelling at me, saying I would never be good enough for Isabel, that she still loved him no matter what I thought, and that he was going to make sure that she and I weren't together. I just tried to ignore him. Starting anything would have probably been a bad move given that he hadn't even touched me or my car. But I was still a little heated. After heading home, it was already pretty late, so I just played video games for a while till I was tired enough to go to sleep. When I was walking back to my room, I saw him from my window, just standing there on the sidewalk looking right at me. The only reason I knew it was him was because of the light from one of the street lamps. My parents had also seen him and asked me to go check it out, since they aren't the youngest of people and wouldn't be able to do much other than yell at him to go away. But as soon as I walked out, he just got in his car and left. This happened every night for about 3 days straight. The last night I ever saw him was not unlike the others, except this time he didn't leave when I went outside. In fact, he started walking closer to me. I didn't notice until he was a lot closer, but he had something in his hand. I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a fairly large knife that you would use in the kitchen. Adrenaline kicked in and I ran back into my house and told my mom to call 911, after which I went back outside. He was just there in the front yard waiting. When I stepped outside, he said, "Isabel belongs to me, and I'm gonna make that happen no matter what." He ran at me with the knife, but muscle memory kicked in and I had pinned him down after that. The cops came shortly after, and I explained the situation to them, after which he was arrested with a couple of different charges that I really don't remember. One other thing I do remember, however, was what was inside of his car. When the police came, they also searched his car to see if he had anything else that I should have been worried about. They found a bunch of tape, some rope, another large knife, a handgun, and a camera. I don't know what was going on through his head, but I could at least guess from the kit he had in his back seat that he planned on hurting me in some type of way and recording it. I hate to think what would have happened if he had tried to come into the house while everyone was asleep, but I'm glad that he was arrested for what he did, or planned to do anyways. Some context. Me and my ex were together for 2 months, and within that time he stole money from me and blamed it on me when I asked him about it. We broke up after I went for advice on Reddit. I go to college for most of the day, go to my work, go home and do homework, then repeat. The story. I was at my job, doing my job, and I get an alert on my phone. I figured that I would watch the cameras after I get home. And so, over the last 2 hours, I got 3 more alerts. And as I was taking the bus back to my home, I watched the cameras. I watched my ex take a hammer to my back door. I kept on watching as he struggled against the deadbolt. and then I saw him enter. I called the police faster than I thought I could and told them that there was a break-in at my address. I continued to watch the video after that. 15 minutes after he entered, he left with a duffel bag. I arrived back to my house to see that police had beat me. I identified myself as the homeowner and went inside to check the damage. The place was trashed, along with my duffel bag, and some jewelry was missing. I gave the police the evidence that it was my ex, and I gave them the place he was crashing at. I then called to put a restraining order against him, along with to replace the deadbolt. Not long after that, they caught him at a pawn shop. He was trying to get back at me for dumping him. I'm now happy that the restraining order is in place, along with my ex being in jail for a year for breaking and entering. Hi everyone. I'm going to start this post by saying that I haven't told anyone about the whole story, mainly because of fear, but also because the guy I'm going to talk about is the son of one of my dad's best friends, and I just know for a fact that my father will inevitably end up blaming all of this on me. Anyways, I'm currently a senior in high school, and I live in a pretty nice town in North Carolina. It all started a year ago when I was 16. At the time, I was working at Starbucks as a barista. It was Thursday, and surprisingly, the cafe was almost empty. A few minutes before the end of my shift, one of my colleagues informed me that a cute guy is here to see you. I was kind of confused. I didn't have a boyfriend at the time, and I'm pretty average, so I couldn't imagine that a guy could be interested in me. As I turned around, I recognized the boy instantly. Henry, my dad's best friend's son. He's 3 years older than me, and for a reason that I wasn't aware of, he enjoyed making me feel miserable, calling me fat, ugly, and all the other sweet things that you really want to hear as an already insecure teenager. So, for obvious reasons, seeing him at my workplace didn't fill me with joy. Now, on a completely objective point of view, he's a very good-looking guy, blonde hair and blue eyes, but he knew that he was attractive, which made me want to punch the smirk right off of his handsome face. I know it sounds like some Wattpad type of story, but it really isn't. Henry was actually here to apologize for being a complete douchebag, and confess that he actually really did like me, but didn't know how to act around me because I radiate such a powerful energy. It's really destabilizing. Weird timing, but okay. Being the dumb girl that I was, I accepted his apologies, and from that moment on, we kept in touch every day. He would send me good morning and good night texts, give me cute nicknames, and whatever else couples do. However, he never asked me to be his girlfriend, but would introduce himself to others as my one true love. I should have seen the red flags from the start. He would show up at my place without asking me at least once a week. I live alone with my dad, who actually really liked the boy, so my old man didn't care about his constant presence at home. After a few months into our relationship, I decided to call it off. He was being really possessive. He was jealous of my girlfriends, and I discovered that he was in contact with his previous girlfriend, and he kept on telling me not to worry about it. Yeah, did that ever truly work for anyone? Didn't think so. His reaction wasn't what I expected. He shrugged and was like, "Okay, whatever you want, babe." Don't get me wrong, I didn't want him to hurt because of me, but he seemed nonchalant about this that it was almost worrying. I thought the story would end here, but oh boy was I wrong. Even after the breakup, he kept on coming over and taking naps on my bed while I wasn't home. When I confronted him about it, he would respond with, "I came to see your dad," or "We're still friends, I don't see what's bothering you." Well, honey, what's bothering me is that if you weren't wearing an expensive-ass cologne with a strong-ass smell, I wouldn't know that you came in my room while I was out. I tried to tell my dad that Henry and I weren't together anymore, and that he had no right to come over and make himself at home in my own room. He just laughed and said that I was being a drama queen, so I guess you understand why I'm kinda stuck at this point. What I didn't know was that Henry was basically following me everywhere. I noticed it a few weeks ago, but I'm pretty sure that it's been going on for quite some time now. He would follow my car as I was going to school, park his truck in the Starbucks parking lot whenever I was working, and he would peek through my bedroom window and leave handprints. How did I not notice it before? Well, as a horror movie fan and true crime podcast enthusiast, it's not unusual to feel observed or spied on. Plus, his truck was pretty common, so I couldn't tell if it was him or not. Until a few weeks ago, my car had a problem with one of the tires, so I had to take the bus for a while. One morning as I got out of my house, I saw his truck and immediately made out his face as he was sitting in the driver's seat. And that's when I connected the dots. My gut feeling going in a frenzy whenever I was out. 3 of my tires being slashed, the handprints on my bedroom window. When the realization hit me, a shiver ran down my spine. I felt paralyzed, and tears welled up in my eyes. I felt nauseous, and decided that I needed to talk about it to somebody, because I've read enough stories about it, and trust me when I tell that crazy ex-boyfriend plus helpless girl don't work out together. I made up my mind and told my friend Tyler, who's 5 years older than me and is studying law, the whole story. And he unfortunately told me that I couldn't do anything because I didn't have any concrete proof. And it would be my word against Henry's, and he's a damn good manipulator. Now I'm stuck, because I don't know what to do. I tried to take pictures of his car, but due to the lack of light in my neighborhood, I never managed to snap one in which we could recognize him. Whenever he's parked in front of my house and we make eye contact, he usually just starts the truck and drives off. I haven't seen him in 3 days. However, my gut feeling is still making me go crazy. So crazy, Henry, let's not meet again. But I know eventually you will show up. My ex JJ was a creep. I was with him for 19 months. This happened around 2 months into the relationship, just as he was starting to get controlling, and it terrified me. It was 2 a.m. and I was in bed. I have super bad insomnia, so I was just listening to YouTube and scrolling through Reddit, not expecting to sleep for at least a couple of hours, when I heard a tap, tap on my window. I assumed it was my cat, so I called her name, because she always meowed when she heard her name. It was silent, and then tap, tap, tap. I turned my YouTube down and called my cat again. I heard her meow in the bathroom and panicked. It wasn't her outside my window. Outside my window is the roof of an extension that was built. It slopes up to my window and can easily be climbed onto via my neighbor's woodshed. At that point, I knew that there was someone out there, but I was too scared to look. I sent JJ a message about it, but he was asleep. So it sent but didn't deliver. The tapping kept happening. Roughly every 20 seconds there would be a tap, 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 and then silence. It continued for about 45 minutes while I lay in bed, just listening. I felt like I was stuck in bed, like if I came out from under the quilt then they would somehow get me. After an hour, I realized it had stopped completely. I pulled myself from my bed and went to my kitchen, where I could see the roof, and I saw a pair of legs dangling over the edge, illuminated by a torch. I decided to give up with my room and slept on the sofa with my cat that night. At least, whoever's it was wouldn't know where I was. Next thing I know, I'm waking up to my alarm. I go to turn it off and notice that I have Snapchats from JJ, which is odd but not unheard of. They're from around 3:30 a.m., so probably just after I fell asleep. I opened the snaps and my stomach dropped. It was a photo of my bedroom window from the outside. Then, a photo of legs dangling into my garden. And then, a photo of me, sleeping on the sofa, taken through the kitchen window. I messaged him asking what the hell he was doing. I got a reply saying he'd come to check on me and chased a guy off from my house. At that point, he had me convinced that he could do no wrong, and if I opposed him, I was scared about what might happen, so I just left it at that. From then on, it happened a couple more times. and every time I just tried to ignore it. But with the joy of hindsight, I know that I shouldn't have. I should have told someone or broken up with him, but I was too scared of what he might do. I have a lot of stories about JJ. I might write some more. I've been considering putting it in a book somewhere, but I'm not sure. I hope if anyone reads this, then they enjoy it. This all started when I broke up with my boyfriend of 1 year about a month ago. There are several reasons why I broke up with him, but the main reason is because I did not like the way he was treating me. He acted like I was his property. He did not like me having friends, etc. And he also called me names, like a B, a C, and a slut. He was also physically abusing me. He pushed me into a wall when I tried to leave the room, and he also slapped me across the face. I could no longer handle it, so I broke up with him. Everything seemed okay until he started calling me and sending me venomous text messages. Texts like, "You're just a cheap slut who no one should care about," and "I hate you. I don't know why I ever went out with you." I deleted and blocked his number. His number is from one of those apps, and he told me that he had no social media. About a week ago, I saw him at my college, and he saw me, and I will never forget the expression of rage mixed with insanity on his face as he came towards me. I ran faster than I had run in a long time. A few days later, I saw him sitting in his truck in the parking lot of the college. That's when my best friend and I decided that it would be best to report him to public safety. When we did, I learned all sorts of things. That he had either lied to me about his name, or that he had lied to me about attending the same college that I did. I'm terrified that he's going to be there again. All I can really do is hope that he won't come too close to me. This happened about 9 years ago. I was living with a roommate at the time in a townhouse in a suburb of Denver. My boyfriend at the time had always been kind of abusive, with the occasional slap or pinning me down on the floor. But after a family member that he was close to committed unaliving themselves, he really lost it. My ex, Pierce, just lost it in the middle of an argument one day about a week after the funeral and threw me on the ground, punching my arm over and over, until there was a giant bruise on one shoulder and a handprint-shaped bruise on the other. My face also ended up being swollen, and I had a bloody lip. My roommate called the police, and he ended up being arrested, and a no-contact order was put in place. He was also ordered to go to counseling, and maybe even drug and alcohol meetings, even though at the time he didn't use. Fast forward a few months. I'm living with this roommate because I was completely financially dependent on him. She's taken it upon herself to pay for me to get my GED. That woman is a saint. I just needed to throw that out there. And a lot of my time was spent on studying for the subjects. After everything, I was very agoraphobic, but I even managed to forge some online friendships, and maybe even something more with a genuinely kind guy. One day, Pierce's grandmother stopped by to take me to pay my phone bill. She lived close by in the same townhouse complex and was more or less right behind where I lived. I remember it being the first beautiful and slightly warm day after a long winter, so I opened all the blinds to let the sunlight in, and left them open when I left. After paying my phone bill, Pierce started calling her. I wasn't too concerned because I knew that he was supposed to be at his court-mandated counseling shortly. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his grandmother told him that we had just stopped at McDonald's. Again, not an issue at this point. I continue to eat my Big Mac or whatever until maybe 3 minutes later, Pierce calls again. His grandma tells him that she's probably going to be home in about 10 minutes. The call ends. I finish my food and we leave. Again, in the car, as I'm maybe 2 minutes away from where I live, Pierce calls again. I still can't hear his side of the conversation, but his grandma tells him the intersection we just passed, and suddenly, I have this terrible sinking feeling in my stomach. I know something is wrong and I can't identify what, but I know in my heart of hearts that something is very wrong. I considered asking his grandma for help, but for context, his grandmother watched Pierce hit me or try to strangle me on multiple occasions, and openly expressed disgust at how I can't help but piss him off. This same lady knew her daughter broke Pierce's nose when he was 6, because he saw his mother flip someone off and copied her, and did nothing to intervene, or let her know that it wasn't okay. The family member Pierce was mourning for often told him that he was effed up, and was probably the most verbally and emotionally abusive person I've ever witnessed in real life, or in any movie, book, whatever. So this family is just super messed up and abusive. To other people, to each other, so I'm completely alone in this situation. Anyway, his grandma pulls up in front of where I live, and I notice that all the blinds I had opened are now closed. We go inside, and once she leaves, I walked upstairs to my room and see a random Word document open on my computer. Pierce has written a whole page worth of shit, but I only pay attention to the big words at the top. I read your emails. Immediately, I know that he's seen the emails between me and the guy I'd met. Even though they weren't outright sexual or flirty, you could kind of tell there was something there. My brain stopped reading at this point, and I need to figure out if he's still in the building. Because there's a no contact order, I know he would have come in through the back door so nobody would see him. So my mind latches onto this idea that if the back door is locked, he's probably gone. I run downstairs to the door and see that it's locked. But as soon as I reach the door, I hear a closet sliding open from the room that I was just in. Loud and angry footsteps, and he's yelling my name. I know that this may sound weird, but I can't recall exact details. I remember his face in mind before I could understand what was happening. I remember being backed up into that room again. I think to go through all of my emails with him, and I remember him slapping me hard in the face, over and over until I got dizzy. I remember somehow convincing him to let me use my phone to respond to one of my roommate's texts. I don't remember what I said, but I remember that she called right away. I remember Pierce standing 2 feet away from me and looking at me, believing he was going to kill me, and my roommate asking me, "Are you safe?" I only said no. She told me that she was on her way and would be there as fast as she could. Eventually, Pierce became convinced that I had called the police, and with a knife in his hands, told me that if they were coming anyway, that he might as well give me what I deserve. I managed to convince him that I didn't call the police, and then he started crying about what a terrible person he was, and he threatened to kill himself with that knife. So, with a handprint on my swollen face, I tried to convince him that he wasn't terrible, and to please not kill himself until my roommate came home. Insane ex-boyfriend, I moved states, have my name changed, and only feel safe in buildings and cities where I'm at least 3 stories up. Let's not ever meet again. I would like to make something abundantly clear in the beginning of this. I was very naive in my youth. Very naive. While my ex was emotionally, sexually, and mentally abusive, he was smart enough to never lay a hand on me physically. He used gaslighting, manipulation, and carefully hidden sadism to control me for 8 years. I forgave him for every slight against me, every instance of cruelty, every mental assault, and every sexual attack. I forgave him because I thought that he loved me and that I was his property because we'd been together for so long and I wore his promise ring. In my mind, I was dealing with actions that would eventually go away with age. I was 17 when I finally got the courage to leave him. And since then, he's left me messages on Facebook, my phone, my email, and called me from texting apps to be a breather. It's always the same message he leaves. I'm still here. Every month, like clockwork, same time, same day, same message. He has done this for 6 years, and I could do nothing about it. He wasn't breaking any laws, so I couldn't report him, and nobody cared about it anyway. So I blocked each account and continued on with my life. But 2 months ago, the messages stopped completely, and I know why. I got engaged to another man the same day he messaged me for the last time and posted about it on Facebook. And magically, the messages stopped. He stopped because I'm going to marry someone else, and in his mind, I'm no longer his property. This is the only thing that makes sense to me, that he believes I belong to the new man and not him. But I have the feeling that I've not seen the last of him. In 2016, my cousin Anna met a man named Jonathan. They were extremely happy together, to the point that in 2018 they got engaged. Anna, however, cheated on Jonathan shortly after with a man named Link. This was poorly solved by an idea to have a polyamorous relationship with Link. As time went on, Link turned into a horrific housemate and boyfriend, so Anna and Jonathan decided that it was time to remove him. This proved extremely difficult. Anna started by asking him to leave, and it didn't work. He refused to go. The landlord also refused to evict him due to him doing no wrong. They decided he needed reason to leave, and I was tasked with removing him. I'm a complete pacifist, but I'm also 6'4" and scared the fuck out of him. I told him to leave, and after I had a short conversation with the landlord who he had called, he was forced to leave via eviction notice. After he was kicked out, he revealed that he was only there for Anna. Who would have guessed? And that would revive the relationship. This was accomplished in a weird way. He was stalking her constantly, following her home from work, standing at her car when she went to a store, just being all around creepy. This was not only bound to her, though. He followed everyone else in the house, and he would keep tabs on me. I saw him watching me in the school parking lot, and we decided things had to change. One night, I visited them and told them about that event, and Anna decided enough was enough. She called Link and told him to F off, and she would call the cops if she saw him again. We all went to sleep and thought that would be the end of it. Oh boy, were we wrong. It was exactly 7 a.m, and I was woken up to what sounded like thunder over and over again. The entire house was shaking. He was at the front door punching it, trying to get in. Because he was so crazy, I had carried a gun to their house the night before just in case this happened. And I yelled, "I'm ready to effing kill you if you're ready to effing die." He took this notice seriously, and the cops were angry at me for threatening him, but due to the circumstances, they let me go. I was there a month later and was having a good time with them, playing video games, beating Jonathan's butt in Mortal Kombat as I do. And then I saw him, looking at me through the window, and I freaked out. It was like a big spider crawling up your arm. He bolted the moment that I saw him, and I couldn't sleep that night. A few nights ago, I visited again, and woke up in the middle of the night. I wanted a glass of chocolate milk and an ibuprofen as my head hurt and I needed to sleep. So I went to the kitchen, and he was there. He had a big effing knife in his right hand. I remember freezing and looking at him. His pupils looked dilated, and he freaked me out. He said, "Hey, it's not what it looks like. I'm here to stab Jonathan in the face." I just love her so much, and everything was fine before she intervened. I ended up attacking him and got the knife away before he ran. When the police finally caught him, they informed us that they would hold him for a bit and then give him a warning. But technically, it was still his house, as he was never properly evicted, and that we needed a restraining order to keep him away. Why are you writing this now, you might ask? Well, it's the only way that I can sleep, to write about my experiences. Hopefully, he'll slip up and get arrested or something. But as long as he's around, I'm having trouble sleeping, and I'm scared for everyone that I care about's life. So, I wouldn't have ever put this story on this Reddit page, but last night took the cake for this whole mess of drama that I had to write about. I'm going to put this in for context that will be useful for later down the road. On March 10th, my very good friend unalived themselves. I was on site with officers and a few close friends who showed up that day as well. It was really tough for me, and many others, and still affects me to this day. Now to the story. And also a quick note. I'm going to skip the sexual parts of this relationship, as it was a weird sexual experience for me that genuinely made me lose my sex drive. And I don't want to mark this as not safe for work. So back at the end of October, beginning of November, I dated this girl named Tina. This girl was really something. She was your basic white girl, loud, unfunny, and always on TikTok trying to do those dances. Our first date rolled around, and we went to our high school's football game, and she wouldn't try to meet up with me at the concession stand because she was genuinely intimidated by me, for whatever reason. Then all of a sudden, she basically wanted to be by me for the rest of the football game. She was extremely erratic in her behavior that day, and that should have been the first red flag for me. Later that night, I was texting her, and she pressured me into telling her about what happened to my friend and what it made me feel like. Normally, I'm a pretty open guy, but I just met this girl and didn't know what to think about her. So I gave in and told her. Later that night, she started talking about how nobody would miss her if she was gone. I didn't know how to react as my anxiety kicked in. I kept trying to tell her that people needed her, and soon I told her I loved her as a panic response, as things ramped up in her behavior. This was the first red flag I noticed, but in reality, I wish it was the second, and I wish that I had stopped talking to her after that football game. But now that I was believing that this girl wanted to unalive herself, I really stuck with it. I played up an act of liking her for a few more weeks. My high school's homecoming was coming up and I asked her to the dance. However, all plans almost ended right there when she ran from home in the middle of the night and had her friend text me about how she was going to unalive herself. Shit got real for me. I was so angry as I yelled at her over the phone, asking for her to tell me where she was. I told her that I was going to call the cops, but she insisted that I didn't. I was going about 60 on every single road. She kept telling me that the cliffside she had been sitting on would be great for jumping off and unaliving herself with. My rage and fear stirred up so hot that I started crying and screaming. I went numb. I found her due to the fact that she was describing a woman who she thought was going to kidnap her or some bullshit. In reality, it was just a woman trying to get an owl out of the way of her car. So I slammed the brakes as soon as I saw the woman and the owl, and jumped out of my car. I had tears in my eyes and rage in my blood as I begged this woman to help me find her. Soon I did, as I saw her outline in the near tree line. I basically had to drive this 5'2" woman out of this ditch and put her in the back of my car. Immediately, she switched from being sad to angry and was calling me insane and kicking the back of my seat like a child. Later that night, I was talking with my mom. I was telling her that I wanted to break up with her, and I almost did, but I was completely terrified of the fact that if I did, she may end up dead. She was in my head. I constantly worried about her, and on top of that, her friends came after me as well, and her, to stir up more attention and drama, which they ate up like a pack of lions with their newly caught prey. Eventually, I did break up with her, however, as I found out it was the right time, and I built up the courage to do it. I was happy for once, and she was not. I felt powerful and in control of my actions again. I even stood up for myself when she tried to pin me as a sex addict and abuser, which was far from the case, and many people can confirm it. I told her how manipulative she was, and how shitty her two-faced friends were. I told her how delusional her reality was, which went in tandem with the side conflict I was having with another friend named Griffin. It turned out, she and Griffin had not only been manipulating me and my friend group, but were having an affair, and messing with each other while I and Tina were dating. So my friends decided to fully cut these people off, and Griffin was gone from our lives. But Tina was not. She continued to send her goons after us and harass us. I was the main target, but my friend Anna took a beating too due to the fact that she was the only girl in the friend group. I had enough and told the principal about each incident in the hopes that she would be removed from the school. I told them I wanted her away from me and my friends as the harassment became worse and worse. It just went from insults and texts over Instagram DMs to filming our conversations and listening in on us and using it as blackmail. They even tried to tear apart a relationship I was in with this girl from my history class, Selena. They didn't do anything but tell them to stop, and then told me to stop, which I have no idea why, as I wasn't doing anything in particular. I took that quote-unquote advice and stopped. When she would harass us, I would just block them out, or if they harassed us in person, we made them out to be the fools. And soon, they realized they couldn't get to us anymore. But then quarantine happened and things became bad. Harassment picked up again, as they knew their school career couldn't be put on the line anymore. And I eventually got pictures of Tina and Griffin FaceTiming and sexting over it, as she flashed him and other things like that. I was disgusted. However, things slowed down as the 1 year of our friend's passing came up, and I just hoped that it would be the end of it, as maybe a time of sadness would make them realize something. But it sure as hell didn't. I got a text last night from an unknown number at 1 a.m. telling me that I was a disgusting person and looked gross. I kept asking who it was, although I knew deep down who it really was. They were insulting me and I insulted back, showing that I wouldn't take their shit. I asked who it was again, and they said, "Someone who hates you." And I kept going. I told them that I didn't even know them, and that they must be miserable to be texting someone they hate at 1 at night. They texted me saying, "I know who you are." And I asked, "Who am I then?" Then they said my name, spelled perfectly, which is a rare occurrence, surprisingly. It's not even a hard name to spell or say, but people just misspell it. Then they went on to say things like, "Why did you hit me? You ruined my life. People thought my parents were abusing me." And then immediately switching to how they loved me and wanted me to be their wife, and how I was all of a sudden gay. None of this made sense, and I was genuinely afraid, as the erratic behavior was genuinely scary and concerning with some of the things that they had said earlier. Soon it turned for the worse. They were telling me they knew where I lived, and they were describing my house in perfect detail. I grabbed a baseball bat that I keep next to my bed and ran downstairs and looked out the windows. It was pitch black, and my fight or flight instincts kicked in. As I stared out the window, trying to see any sort of shadow moving in the dark, my phone buzzed. They were in my backyard. I just texted calmly, but in reality, I was in panic, and I ran to the back windows. Still pitch black. Our dim porch and backyard lights wouldn't help a thing. All I knew to do was call the cops. 2 cars showed up at my house, and I and my parents stayed up a bit later until they left. I showed them the text, and they asked if there was anyone who would threaten me, or anything I did to anyone in the past that would result in this. I just told them about my batshit crazy ex. I got a text about how boring I was and that they were blocking me. Not sure if it was related to the cops showing up, making things lame for them, or because I started texting with no reactions whatsoever. Either way, things went too far. I will continue to update this story if things happen, and hopefully, the next time stuff goes down, it'll be the end of all of this nonsense. We all have that one ex that just grinds our gears, but mine is fairly more creepy than the average drunk texting asshole. About 3 years ago, I was in a long-distance relationship with a younger man, meaning he was only 17 at the time, while I turned 19 in the relationship. His name is Peter. Peter was not a nice person, to say the least. He thought that first impressions he made on people were the only ones that he needed, and as such, he stopped being nice, polite, or reasonable to people after the first meeting. I was young and saw past this, thinking that I could somehow change him. However, this abuse towards people around me and myself eventually became too much, and I broke off the relationship with him. The breakup went smoothly, all things considered, except he wanted me to say the words so he could play the victim. This had been a core element of our fighting, because he hinted that he wanted the breakup, but instead of just saying it, he kept me on the hook and became even more abusive. I'm getting sidetracked, but the point was that I thought of the matter as resolved and entered a loving relationship with my current boyfriend shortly after this. Then came the day where Peter wanted to get his belongings back. I texted him a list of everything he had left in my apartment, and he okayed that it was everything. We also made an appointment for him to stop by my apartment around 3 p.m. the following Thursday. I have no intentions of letting him back into my home, nor being alone with him, since he suddenly seems to have many mood swings after seeing me in another relationship. He's been blocked from my Facebook account, but somehow still knew that I was in a new relationship, which was a major red flag to me and my boyfriend. Thursday came, and I felt eager to just be done with it. My boyfriend and I are walking home from school when my phone rings. It's Peter. He yells at me that he's now been waiting at the train station for over an hour. I try to reason with him, agree to meet him there with his belongings since he needs to catch a train. My boyfriend walks with me to the train station, but we arrive only to find it vacant. I live in the small town, and the train station is mostly used during rush hours in the morning and evening. It is also located rather bizarrely among normal residences, and there are a lot of off alleyways leading all over town from there. I get a text stating that Peter can see us, but won't come out of hiding when my boyfriend is there. We leave his stuff on a bench at the train station, calmly replying that I'm not actually interested in a meeting with him. When I say calmly, I mean that my reply is calm. I'm shaking, and my boyfriend is furious over this child's play. On our way home, I receive another text. This time he states that he has a gift for me, and it's in my mailbox. This freaks us out even more, mostly because this indicates that he might be waiting at my home. It is entirely possible that he watched us at the train station and then ran all the way back to my apartment. However, there is no trace of him and nothing except a bill in my mailbox. By now, we figure that he's acting up out of spite and proceed to ignore the bombardment of texts, calls, and so forth that follows that day. After a while, life returns to normal. Then I get another call, this time from my ex's older brother, who is worried about his sibling. Apparently he's disappeared, taking one of his brother's gas pistols. I'm speechless, but since I haven't seen anything, I shake it off as another childish act. The same day, my boyfriend sees police officers walking around the basement staircase on the exterior of the house we lived in while doing some grocery shopping. He did this every day around 4 p.m. The next day, we were contacted by my boyfriend's mother. It's in the newspaper. There's a description of an unnamed young man from the same town as Peter who has been arrested for attempted robbery of the pizza place that I lived above. He was armed with a knife, a gas pistol, and lighter fluid, while stating that he was not attempting a robbery, but there to visit his ex, presumably me. Contacting the police, I discover that he also had a mask, fake papers, a wig, and a duffel bag, which he had thrown down into the staircase when around 4 p.m. he had jumped to vents and tried to enter the pizza place. This means that my boyfriend went out of our front door, while my ex was hiding right behind the front door armed. I have never been more freaked out than that ever. The sad truth is that my ex never got charged with anything because he's a minor and has a father with a military background and money. I write this now because after 3 years, I thought that this horror story was finally a closed chapter. That was, until I received a declaration of love from a fake email account signed Peter. I received this just 2 weeks ago. This happened yesterday, after I finished the night shift at around 3 a.m. I work at a store of a big fast food chain to pay for my university. Our staff changes frequently because of a lot of students and migrants working at our place, so you don't get to know each other very well. Everybody has their own social life, and it's very, very rare for coworkers to establish friendships outside of working hours. Still, you know the people on your shift, and the night shift has particularly few workers. One of my coworkers, Jasir, started to get interested in me. Not that I noticed. I'm young and dumb. Like being friendly and important for later, I have a hard time saying no. In December 2019, our store threw a Christmas party at a pub. I went and had a great time, but I also made plans for later that night. Because of that, I wanted to leave early, which made Jasir also want to leave early, despite the fact he neither needed nor planned it beforehand, which made me uncomfortable. Unfortunately, he didn't know how to get to the train station, and I did, so I couldn't say no and just let him tag along. When we arrived at the train station, it came to light that there was no train that he could take to get home. None. He did not check beforehand. He did not ask me. He just wanted to tag along with me. That made me super uncomfortable. Instead of taking the train to the main station, he got into my train and only got out when I insisted he change his trains at another big station. But oh boy, that was not the train of the title. On January 2020, Jasir asked me out for coffee and I agreed. I thought, he just wants friends. He doesn't have any and can only rely on his coworkers. If something happens, I can just nope out. So I went. First it was okay-ish. We mostly talked about work-related stuff because we don't share any hobbies. We're not the same age and we don't have the same mother tongue, language. Jasir didn't like talking about work and nothing more. He started talking about how different I was from the other coworkers, how nice of a person I am, and how good my charisma is. Then, he asked if we could get to know each other better. I genuinely didn't want to, and still don't. Jasir is not my type, neither as a person, nor from his looks, especially his looks. Even if I sound superficial, while I'm in my early 20s, Jasir is at least in his early 30s. I have no problem with age gaps, a story for another subreddit, but I am not attracted to men that dress like teenagers. Instead of telling Jasir a straight no, I told him that I was not interested in having a boyfriend. He didn't take that seriously and told me that I would change my mind. I told him I wouldn't. He, again, was not really on board with that opinion, so I elaborated my opinion 3 times in German and 1 time in English to get it very clear. He always changes to English if he does not get something, or thinks he's misunderstood. Even if he heard it clearly and just does not like it. I mean, obviously my opinion is going to change if I explain it in English other than German. We left the conversation with him still not convinced, and me being really not interested in a second meeting. He quit soon after, and I foolishly assumed I was free. But whenever he came to my workplace to place an order, he would ask me out to eat something, and every time I would postpone whatever I said the last time. Because of finals, because of travel, because of anything I could get my hands on. Then came COVID-19 that hit Germany in March, and I didn't see him anymore. I blocked him on social media in April, and hoped that that was the last thing to happen. But oh boy, that was not the case. Today, I finished my shift at 3 a.m. and left with my female and very Asian coworker, Wei, to catch the next train. We take different trains, so we decided to wait in the main lobby until I needed to go to my platform. In that time, Jasir appeared. He just finished his shift and was on his way home. Wei asked him which train he needed to get, and he said that he was walking home. While the conversation went on, I got closer to Wei to get some space between me and Jasir. Wei did not grasp how uncomfortable I was in this situation, and she just walked away. What did Jasir do? He placed himself between me and Wei, right in my vision line. Every fiber in my body felt how he barged into my personal space. I decided I could not take a private conversation with him and said, "Oh look, I need to go to get to my platform." But Jasir followed me, through the main lobby, through the train station, into the elevator, and into the train. I was internally screaming and walked through the train until I saw another passenger. I sat down in the row of seats next to me and Jasir followed. As if every bit of luck had just left me, the other passenger moved seats and went away, so I was back alone. Jasir talked and talked, and I showed clear signs of not wanting to continue the conversation. I hoped he would leave before the train departed, but he didn't. Mind you, the train goes in the opposite direction of his house and is 1 hour walking distance to my workplace. There is no way in hell this man could get anything out of taking that train, except for following me and continuing the conversation. I was freaked out and told him in English that he was acting very weird. Maybe I should have used a different word, but English is not my first language, and at that point, I only thought about escaping. I could not let him see my station, or he could easily follow me home. I don't live rural, but at 3 a.m., there's nobody on the streets, so him following me home was terrifying. I thought about getting off a station earlier, but then I would need to get a cab, for which I did not have cash on me. Or I needed to walk and he could still follow. I decided to get up at the next station, let him get out of the train first, and then just stay inside while the doors closed. It fortunately worked, but only after telling him that this was not my station. I would not get out, and he would not get back in. I even held my hand out to stop him from coming back. He stayed outside after the conductor shouted at us to let the door closed. So let's rewind. He's way older than me, but does not get the concept of me not wanting to be in a relationship with him. Whenever he does not like an answer, he switches to English, because it just might be a misunderstanding. He followed me 2 times into my train and almost home, without even thinking about how creepy that behavior is. So Jasir, my ex-co-worker, let's not meet again. This is going to be a bit long. So I had a best friend in high school named Lena. We were friends for about 1.5 years, and we would spend almost every weekend at her house, listening to music, watching scary movies, and gossiping. She was just a little bit crazy, the type of girl to beat up her boyfriend's exes unprovoked. She actually did that once. And she was also the type of girl to catfish people. I say we're best friends, but actually, it was more like I looked up to her, and she liked that she could boss me around and hang out with me whenever she pleased. She was extremely manipulative and two-faced. She had a hobby of being nice to girls at school and then going on their social media and making fun of everything they posted. She would befriend people just to get the information from them. When we were friends, Lena was dating this guy named Nolan. They dated for about 1.5 years and had lots of troubles the last 6 months or so. He would go out drinking most weekends, and she would cry in the middle of the night and blow up his phone, yelling at him and making him feel guilty. She was borderline psychotic when it came to his exes or the other girls that he was friends with, and they just weren't really working out, but they stayed together anyways. At some point, Nolan got Lena pregnant, and one of Lena's other friends, whose name was Autumn, became pregnant at the same time for the guy that I was in love with. Naturally, I wanted nothing to do with Autumn, but because they were pregnant together, Lena started hanging out with Autumn most weekends and neglected our friendship. After about a month, I became fed up with it and started ghosting her. At first, she tried to apologize, but I was not having it, since the other girl was dating the guy I had been in love with for 2 years, and I was just jealous and childish. So eventually, Lena got pissed at me and stopped trying. A few months went by and Lena had the baby. Nolan and Lena stayed together to take care of their son, but their relationship was absolutely horrendous at that point. Lena cheated on him, and Nolan decided he wanted out of the relationship, but continued to see his son and buy things for him. However, Lena and Lena's mother made things very difficult for him by constantly changing the days that he could see his son, and refusing to let him take his son anywhere besides Lena's house. Lena's mother would also throw out Christmas presents from Nolan, ignore his phone calls, and eventually told him that he wasn't allowed at the house. Nolan begged for months to see his son, but it was clear that Lena and her mother didn't want him in the picture. Nolan offered to pay child support, but they didn't want that either. They just wanted him gone. So he stopped trying. And apparently, even that wasn't what they wanted. Lena took to social media to talk about how Nolan was a deadbeat. She told everyone she knew that being a single mother was really hard, and the baby daddy refused to take care of his dad. A year after they broke up, I met Nolan in person. We had been talking online for a couple of months about Lena. We had shared stories about her crazy meltdowns and her manipulative tendencies, and we talked about the time he came to her house while I was there and attempted to scare her by jumping out when she went out the front door, but instead accidentally jumped out at me. He thought it was the funniest thing ever that my face stayed stone cold and I said, "Sup?" We had a similar sense of humor, and at the time, I had no one. I had just come out of the worst depressive episodes of my life. It had lasted a good year, and I had dropped out of school, been doing drugs, isolating myself for weeks at a time, and considering unaliving myself. He was the one to help bring me back from the brink. He was kind, and he was my support system. We were just friends at first. When Lena caught wind of our friendship, she reached out to me. At this point, we hadn't been friends in over a year and a half. We caught up and talked about what had been happening in our lives. She asked what was going on with Nolan, and I told her we were just friends. Everything seemed fine. That's when her erratic behavior started. She would randomly block me on social media, and then unblock me a month or two later. Sometimes we would talk like, "How are you? Everything good?" And then the next day, I'm blocked. At one point, I asked one of her friends to get her to tell me why she was doing it, because I was so confused. So she unblocked me, and told me that she was salty about the situation with Nolan, and the fact that I was friendly with him. I asked her why she kept making up with me, and then suddenly getting pissed again and cutting me off. I told her I was tired of thinking things were good, only for her to turn around and pretend like we had never said anything to each other. That's when she said she could block me again, or keep me unblocked. Whatever I wanted was fine, but she felt that I had done her wrong by abandoning her during her pregnancy, and then befriending her ex-boyfriend. So then I tried to explain to her why Nolan was my friend. I tried to tell her that Nolan was all I had in the darkest time of my life. I tried to tell her why her neglecting me for Autumn hurt my feelings, but she wasn't having it. I understand where she was coming from, I do, and I acknowledge the fact that I had acted childishly and in a cruel way, but I had tried to make up with her multiple times. I tried really hard, and she couldn't even stick with whether she wanted to forgive me or not. So I told her to block me again and be done with it. She told me she wouldn't block me again, and then she gave me her blessing with Nolan. She said she was fine if we wanted to date, and she said she hoped I had a good life, and I said the same to her, and I really meant it. We had a bad end, but I was glad we could at least wish each other well. It was a few months after I last spoke to her that Nolan and I started dating. I had waited so long because I was worried about Lena, even though we weren't friends anymore. But she had given me her blessing, and she was dating someone new, so I went with it. It was around this time that I received a friend request from a girl on Facebook named Casey. Casey said she lived in a big city in my state, and since we had mutual friends and I had once gone to school in that city, I assumed that we had gone to school together, and I just didn't remember her. She seemed like a real person. She claimed to work at Hooters, had made posts about how her workdays went, had several pictures of the same girl, and made frequent posts about her ex-boyfriend. I accepted the friend request and she messaged me, telling me how pretty she thought I was. I thanked her and told her to message me anytime she wanted to chat. For the next few months, I was clueless. I went about my regular life, posting about the things I did with Nolan, getting my GED, hanging out with friends, visiting my mother, etc. Occasionally, I would see strange posts on my timeline from Casey, but didn't think much about it because I had over 1,000 friends on Facebook, and I rarely saw them. They were mostly posts about how much she hated her baby daddy, and how her line of work sucked. But there were two posts in particular that caught my eye. One was a post that seemed to be referencing something I had posted the day before, and the other was of her saying, we all know a dirty hoe named blank, with my first name in the blank. So I went to her profile and then clicked through months and months of posts. Some were about her line of work. Everything else was related to me and Nolan. Everything. There were posts of her complaining about her deadbeat baby daddy buying things for everyone but his kid. Posts about how sad she felt about the breakup. Posts about how she missed me and thought of me as a sister, which is bullshit and I'll explain why later. Posts about how I stole her boyfriend, and a myriad of posts just talking crap about me. She made fun of my hobbies, had directly referenced some of my posts, talked about how much she hated me, said I was a dirty hoe, and in her later posts, even went so far as to put my initials or full first name in the post. She even had people in the comments egging her on and talking shit too, even though no one knew who she was talking about. But I did. She mentioned things that only the two of us knew. She referenced our past experiences. It was undoubtedly Lena. I messaged Casey and told her that I knew it was Lena. She played dumb and told me the initials were of another girl she knew. When I looked up the name she gave me, not a single person on Facebook had that name. When I told her that, she brushed over it and tried to get me to talk about Lena. So I played along and talked hardcore shit about Lena. I lied about a lot of things in an attempt to get her to out herself. But in the end, all she did was send a screenshot of our conversation to Lena's account in an attempt to make it look like Casey was real and was trying to help Lena out by showing what kind of person I was. Casey then immediately deleted her account. She didn't block me, she deleted it. I had a friend and my dad check, and neither of them could find Casey's profile. So then another month went by, and I found out she had reactivated the account. And because I can't block a deleted account, she was in my friends list again and had access to my profile for who knows how many days. So I blocked her. She then sent me a friend and follow requests on 3 other websites under the Casey name, which I also blocked. It was around that time that me and Nolan began to get a lot of friend requests from obviously fake accounts. We would report them and block them, and try to pretend that she wasn't going insane. One of these fake accounts was extremely obvious, because it had poked both me and Nolan on the same day, at the same time. She was taunting us, I guess. I blocked that account too. Please be aware that at that time, Lena was married to her boyfriend. She had been doing this while married to someone else. A year later, I thought it had stopped, and one day I went to Casey's account on my friend's Facebook because I wanted to see if she was still posting about me. And when I scrolled down, I realized that I had missed a post last time. This post was Lena mocking the fact that my mother, yes, my birth mother, called her frequently to talk shit about me and give her information on me and Nolan. Turns out, my mother and Lena went to the same college, and my mother thought what better way to make friends than by helping someone stalk my daughter. She would ask me about mine and Nolan's relationship often. She talked shit about Lena and would act like the perfect mother to my face. She didn't raise me, so I didn't trust her 100%. For that reason, I never gave her my phone number, address, or any other information that I felt was private. When my dog went missing, she tried to convince me to post my address on Facebook. She kept saying how important it was that people know exactly where he went missing from. What horse shit. Thank God I didn't, because I might have woken up to Lena punching me in the head, or worse. For a while, I was legitimately paranoid. Every time I went to the store or went outside, I was watching my surroundings closely, because if Lena was willing to beat the shit out of a girl that Nolan had dated for 3 weeks, unprovoked, what would she do to me if she saw me in public? Would she kill me? I had never met someone so obsessive. Let me just say that Lena was a horrible friend. She was manipulative, bossy, judgmental, rude, erratic, narcissistic, and two-faced. When I felt my first heartbreak, she spent all night talking shit about the guy, saying that I deserved better. Eventually, I talked shit with her too to make myself feel better. And what does she do? She messages him on Facebook and tells him everything that I said about him. She guilt-tripped me about having other friends. She convinced me to abandon one of my friends just because she didn't approve of her. She would ignore me when there were other people around. If I complained about anyone, she would go tell that person what I said, even if she had said something worse about them. She would go through people's Facebooks and laugh at them and talk about how dorky they were, and not in a nice way. In a, this person is scum for being a bit dorky kind of way. She would make me feel ridiculous for liking the things I did, and I never felt like I could be myself around her. It amazes me how many people Lena has manipulated. Even her poor husband probably doesn't know she was a stalker. So yeah, there you have it. Lena Steiber stalked me for 2 years, and if I had given my mother my address, it might have become actual stalking. She hasn't been trying to stalk me for a while now. I cut my mother off and deleted all but 40 people off of my Facebook, and made all my social media accounts private to keep this from happening again. I'm hoping that I won't ever hear from Lena again. The last obvious sign I've gotten of her, still trying to stalk me, is a fake account that sent me a friend request about 3 months ago. An account that was a few months old, had the same last name as my friend, who told me he didn't know her, and only like 2 Facebook pages, one of which was a grocery store page and the other was my page. My obscure Facebook page, my page that has spaces in between the letters, and Japanese letters in the name. My page that you either have to know the exact name of, or have a link to find. My page that I had already had to ban Lena and Casey from, because both accounts also liked it. Sometimes I wonder if Lena is even trying to be secretive or if she's just stupid. At least her attempts are few and far between now, so I don't consider her to be stalking me anymore. Anyway, if you finish this, sorry for such a long story. I was young when all this stuff happened, and I made some really dumb choices, so go easy on me, please. I know I'm not 100% faultless in this. And yes, me and Nolan are still together, and we will be celebrating our 4-year anniversary in a couple of months. My ex-housemate was potentially a serial killer. This is a convoluted story, so bear with me as I try to convey everything I can recall about what led me to the conclusion that my ex-housemate could have potentially been a serial killer, or a serial killer in the making. It was the summer of 2015 when I moved in, and at first appearances, my housemate/landlord Mike was somewhat normal, if not a bit socially awkward and dysfunctional. When I was signing the papers, he was adamant that I should never go into the basement, which I thought was odd, but I really needed a place to stay, and, well, people have their little quirks. So I just chalked it up to that at the time. As I got to know Mike, and our cohabitation continued, I learned more about the depths of his dysfunction. Firstly, that he used meth. Now, I don't automatically judge people based on vices, but I was surprised at the extent of his use. He was probably the first person I knew who used meth and balanced a full-time job, enjoyed a decent amount of success. The reason this is important to the story is that when he would be around the house, drinking and using meth, he would start to run off at the mouth. He would often joke that if I smelled lye coming from the basement, not to think anything of it. I think it was probably the 3rd time he said this that I asked why he keeps saying that, and he said, "I just use those chemicals to clean up after the bodies," with a wily grin on his face. I tried to chalk that up to a bad sense of humor, but it didn't set right with me. He was also very particular that I let him know of my coming and going, and my work schedule. I remember him being shocked and uncomfortable one day that I ended up taking off of work, because he didn't realize that I was home. I remember that day because there was a lot of clanging, and what sounded like muffled shouting coming from the basement. His car was in the driveway, but he was not in the main house or in his bedroom. Other days he would play very loud music that bumped through the whole house. Sometimes he would even play NPR radio at those volumes. In retrospect, I think he may have been trying to mask sounds. He would make remarks about sex workers, saying, "You can do whatever you want. You can choke them or beat them to death and nobody cares." I took exception to this. I told him I thought that was messed up. but when he would get tweaking, he'd always come back around to alluding to the same kind of violence, talking about how he was a normal white guy who owned a house and had a good career, so the police would never suspect him. At this point, I start to think that it's gone a bit too far to simply be a joke. I was in a weird position, because money was tight at the time and my options were few. I tried to convince myself that even if he is messed up, he's probably just engaging in outward fanaticism. I knew that he would acquire the services of sex workers on occasion, but again, did not judge that activity at face value, but started becoming concerned. Then, at one point when I was doing laundry, I caught whiffs of decomposition. The house we were in was in southeast Portland. It was relatively new. Having grown up in upstate New York, I know that animals can be trapped in walls and die, but this was the garage, and there were no animals scurrying in the walls. This was strange and telling to me. I considered carefully what I would do and decided I would confront him about the smell. I decided to pose the question in a somewhat suggestive way by expanding on his jokes. I told him that he needs to do a better job cleaning up the bodies because I smelled decomposition from the garage. I will never forget his reaction. His eyes widened and he shot me a sharp glare, somewhere between fear and anger. He stumbled over his words and eventually responded, "What? Really?" I said, "Yes, really." And there was a few seconds of awkwardness before he said, "Thanks for letting me know," and promptly went into his bedroom and shut the door. A few days after that, he went into the upper crawl space in the garage while I was doing laundry again. He called for me and was trying to convince me to come up into the crawl space. My body locked up, and it was like my instincts were screaming at me that if I went up there, I would not come back down. I gave some excuse that I can scarcely remember, that I had to be someplace. I packed up my laundry, threw it in my room, and left. We spent a lot of time in the padlocked basement without a doorknob. The only way in was through the backyard. I wish I would have gone down there in retrospect, to either confirm or dismiss the suspicions once and for all. In the last couple of months I had lived there, I was privy to more graphic comments about women and sex workers, explicit talk of sexual violence, and he was using more and more. He once showed me a video that he had made. He's a graphic designer and artist as well, which featured heavy bondage themes, interspersed with distorted audio of women screaming, and this strange, leering figure in a plague doctor costume. It was one of those situations where any one of those things alone may be innocuous, but as they were accumulated, it became suspicious to me. It was October of 2016 that I left there, taking off to Oseti Oyete camp during the anti-pipeline protests with Standing Rock, Lakota. A mix of feeling called to action and having nothing else to lose, as I wanted to get out of the house in the worst way. My last night there, I did not give notice that I was leaving. He was drinking and tweaking again. Started in on the same conversation, loosely describing murder and violence in the tone of some sort of edgy joke. I told him he would be caught eventually, not even holding back my suspicion anymore. He reiterated that he was the last person police would suspect and asserted that they wouldn't catch him. I said this in a very serious and concise way, dropping the pretense that he had been using before. I left the next morning. This haunted me for months, then a year and a half. I felt as though I hadn't done anything. The guilt was eating away at me. So I called Portland Crime Stoppers and put in an anonymous tip describing what I had described there. When I did, the operator started going back and forth, putting me on hold because the call had piqued the interest of the police sergeant who was assigned to the call center. So they were asking me detailed questions about his vehicle, his house, the methods he described, etc. It seemed like they took interest. I gave them as much information as I could remember and left it at that, feeling just a little bit better that I had at least tried to do something about it. Fast forward to recent times. I told my mother about all of this, and she became interested, asking what house this was, and she ended up pulling it up on Google Maps. She put it up on Street View, and I noticed that there was a large enclosed trailer in the driveway that wasn't there when I was. I could theorize why it might have been there, but cannot put together a practical reason for it, or why he'd be using it, unless it was moving or using it to haul things to discard. Admittedly, that is pure conjecture, but I couldn't help but wonder. I doubt that I'll get closure or have my suspicions validated unless he does finally get caught and arrested. And I read about it. I've grown up poor and been around the lowlife a lot. I've interacted with many sketchy and unsavory people in my time, but none of them have ever made the impression that Mike made on me. To keep a long story short, my ex-best friend Alyssa and I were friends for almost 7 years. We had a good, healthy relationship. She was my ride or die. We did everything together, but we slowly started to drift away when I exchanged schools. We saw each other after school, so it was cool. Well, a year passed and I started to notice Alyssa hanging out with the wrong crowd, and I didn't want any part of that. I started to notice how Alyssa would pick on me about my appearance and clothing, but she used to dress like me. We used to be dripped in anime merch, but ever since she started to hang out with more mature college people, she changed. She would constantly tell me that I'm fat, ugly, or nobody loves me at all, that type of stuff. And my last straw was when she called my family poor. I lost it because my family has helped her with financial problems and even gotten them out of debt. So I stopped being friends with her, and I started to hang out with new people and get to know myself more. I've made a new best friend and everything was great, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from every corner. I always felt like someone was there, but I ignored it. Months passed by and I still can't shake the feeling of being watched. And that's when stuff started to happen. My car would end up getting keyed. My tires were popped. And weird letters I had to decipher started to show up on my front porch. But I'm dumb and just decided to ignore the problems. A year later, I decided to hang out with some old friends from the group, and that's when I found out everything. Alyssa was the one doing those things to me, and every letter she sent was a death threat. My friend Tori, the one who witnessed everything, told me how Alyssa would stalk me and get mad that I replaced her with a guy. That's not what creeped me out. Turns out, Alyssa copied everything. I got a 2018 Nissan Sentra, and she got the same car. Inside my dashboard on my car, I have My Hero Academia figures and South Park figures, and she went as far as to get the same type of figures online and put them on her dashboard. She would wake up at 6 a.m., drive to my house, and wait for me to wake up and get out of the house so she could follow me. She tried adding my friends on social media and tried to convince them to leave me for her because she's a better friend than me. She even got the same clothes as I did. According to Tori, when she would visit Alyssa at her house, Alyssa would have the same anime posters. I didn't believe her at first until she showed me pictures. Everything was the same, as if Tori was seeing double of everything. Lucky for me, Alyssa was forced to move up north with her father. Her grandma kicked her out of her house, and everything went back to normal. For now, I'm just scared when she comes over for holidays and starts to stalk me again. I posted this on another subreddit earlier today, but someone redirected me here, so I figured I would share. So I matched with this girl on Tinder, Jenna. Jenna and I went on our first date on January 26th. She knew I just got out of a long-term relationship and still maintained occasional contact with my ex, Mary. Jenna and I officially started calling each other boyfriend and girlfriend around mid-February. 3 days ago, while I'm in the shower, she goes through my phone and reads old messages between Mary and I. A few casual ones and a few very affectionate ones from before Jenna and I started seeing each other, or before we even met. Jenna packs all of her things and is heading out of the door when I get out of the shower, with my phone. She texts a bunch of people saying things like, "I'm an asshole," and "Mary is a manipulative bitch." She hacks into my Facebook and makes a post calling Mary a whole slew of names, and blocks and unfriends several of my friends. She does a similar thing with Twitter. I get a hold of coworker's phone and use it to try and contact her and sign back into my Facebook. Once she realizes I did this, she changed my passwords and my email passwords as well. Eventually, she tells me she wants to talk this out and to meet at my place. I play along so I can get my phone and passwords back. She gives me my phone and makes me call Mary and tell her that I'm cutting her out of my life. I got a hold of Mary earlier and warned her something like this might happen. We both have a background in theater, so we had a very convincing argument over speakerphone so Jenna could hear. Jenna gives me my passwords and I immediately change them. I tell her that she should leave and she doesn't understand why I want her out of my life. She goes home very upset about me breaking up with her over this. Jenna starts posting and commenting on my Facebook and I block her. I blocked her on everything, and she begins calling me over and over, not saying anything when I try to pick up the phone. I block her number. I start receiving the same calls over and over from a Colorado number. I live in Canada. Eventually, I go to my phone provider and change my number. I also changed the locks on my door in case she took a key. Next day, she makes a Facebook page calling me a piece of crap and Mary a manipulative C word, and she hacks into my alt Twitter account. I tell her if she calls me one more time or posts one more thing about anybody, I know that I'm calling the police. I get an email saying that my application for a credit card with a bank that I do not use has been approved. I call the bank and tell them what's happening, and they put a freeze on the account. Several friends had told me to call the police, and I finally realized that enough is enough. The police come and tell me that she has some sort of file with them, and that her name isn't even Jenna. It's something completely different. They issue a warning of harassment, and if she tries to contact me again, I call the police and she gets arrested. On Monday, I have to call the fraud people to get all my accounts frozen and investigated and stuff. I realize this is a lot, but this is actually a pretty bare bones version of the story. Basically, the reason I'm posting this is now that I got the police involved and I've had my locks changed and my number changed, all is solved. I'm starting to feel the emotional damage of being abused and harassed by someone that I was really starting to care about, and I don't know how to deal with it. Someone on the other post called bullshit on this, so I proved them with the screenshots of the Facebook page that she made of me and the phone numbers that she was calling me from that I have now blocked. I'm an aspiring comedian, so that's why the page calls me one. If you want some further form of proof, feel free to ask me. I know it sounds crazy, but that's because it is. Before we get to the extra rain at the end of this video, I would like to thank all of our channel members: Recovery BMX UK, Cheryl Taylor Harris, Lindsay Chavez, Flat Booty Biscuits, West Virginia Angel, Jamie Gavisk, Shay Shay, Lexi Lou, Xanax Master, Dark Poison, Michelle Dickinson, Spike 2021, Patrick F., Corey Maloney, CC's Castle, Charity McVeigh, Tom H., Jess and Dave McDonald, Melissa E. Gondera, Salvador VL, Derek Slank, Randy Music, Brooklyn Ledbetter, Skincrawler, Lisa Thompson, Liz C., Melissa Robertson, Board Shorts and Tea, Natasha Strom, Sarah Rodriguez, Melissa Reddy, Kayla Johnson, Skittlebritches, Carly's Van Aswengan, Furberry's Fables, Taryn, Brittany, Said I Would, Inner Scare Wifey, Ruby Wilson, Vanita Tillman, Jennifer Moyer, Bendy and the Ink Machine, Chili, Cutie Patootie, Cappy Karma, Pamela Curran, Christy Goodall, Paul Reese, Fia MajK0101, and Honey Pond. Thank you all so much for being members. I appreciate you guys so much. And for everyone, enjoy the extra rain, and good night.